Hi everyone. I hope everyone's having a good start to their summer break if you're on summer break. I chose this week to do Gloria Ladson Billings. I chose to do her because she's someone new and I haven't read about her before. Um, I was very interested in a lot of the things that she brought up in a paper that I found of hers called But That's Just Good Teaching, the case for cultural relevant pedagogy. One thing that Gloria Ladson Billings talks about is her big idea is cultural relevant learning and pedagogy. When answering the questions, she was inspired for this research because she felt in education there was a disconnect between um, low income African American schools and the teachers that were there. And a lot of studies and research has shown that a majority of teachers are white female women, and there's a big disconnect between low income African schools. So she really did some research in how to help um, these students in these situations and help teachers. Her understanding is, and her research is based on cultural relevant pedagogy, as I mentioned. And her view of this and her view of knowledge in this has three different criteria, and one of them is academic success. The second one is development of cultural competence, and the other one is develop a critical consciousness through which students challenge the status quo of the current social order. Each of these things are important in how we gain knowledge. And one of the things I found most interesting is within her idea of academic success, she still believes knowledge is numeracy and reading and literacy and all of those important skills that all of us find important to be good members of society. And she believed that this, in her research, focused on this being one of the central focuses of knowledge and learning. And her focus was getting students to choose academic success and how to motivate students to choose this success. And a lot of that comes with finding ways to take their skills that they have. And remember, a lot of this is focused on African American students in low income schools and taking their skills that they have within their culture or skills that they have within society and getting them engaged in academic success. The second part of this is developing or maintaining cultural competence. And this kind of means cultural integrity and not just identifying who they are and knowing who they are and believing in that, but also utilizing this idea of who they are in their culture and their learning. So, for example, one of the things she discusses in her article that I read was a teacher used this understanding of cultural competence in having students bring in using music, their kind of music, and understanding poetry, and using their understanding of their culture and then adapting it into the learning situation. One of the teachers who did this was a second grade teacher, and I just found that totally interesting that this idea could be applied at a second grade level. But it really got the students to learn about alliteration, onomatopoeias, and things like that in poetry that most often are not interesting for any student in general. The last one that the criteria is the developing a critical consciousness through which they challenge the status quo of current social order. And I just thought that was a very wordy criteria, but it really goes back to our last class when we learned about Freire and his work in Brazil with people who had been underutilized and not getting what they needed. And she talks about the same thing with African Americans in the South. It's the same idea as Freire had, but it's teaching African American students how to stand up for themselves and be a part of solving the problem. So one of the teachers they talked about was what they did was they really analyzed and critiqued the old textbooks that they had. They went through the textbooks and they critiqued the material that they were supposed to be learning, and then used that as a way of challenging the status quo and what they had at the time. And a lot of the big idea is solving community problems as a community and going out into the community and challenging why are things the way they are and how can we make them different. And I don't think this just is a African American level, but it's a great idea in general, for our knowledge and things. When we think about the reading that we had this week, a lot of it related back to Wilson. In his writing, he said that our differences as students should not be an obstacle for teachers. They should be a helper. They should help guide our instruction. And I think Gloria Ladson Billings really talked about this, and using one of the quotes she started with, if I can find it here, I wrote it down, is a lot of the times we insert culture into education rather than letting education into the culture. And I think that's one thing that Wilson also talked about, is he wanted our differences to guide our education and guide our learning. And that's a huge part of teaching. And I think Gloria Ladson Billings really talked about that, and the identifying your culture, being competent within your culture, and then using what you know about who you are to solve problems, and all of this revolving around the education field. Overall, I think Gloria Ladson Billings was a huge influence in inclusivity and diversity in the classrooms in multiple ways of being. There's multiple cultures, and we need to include all those cultures into our education, and not just include them into the education, but revolve our education around the cultures that are within our society. And that's a huge part of her learning theory. So that is all, and I look forward to hearing some feedback from you, and look forward to hearing everybody else's. Thanks.